The only podcast you can truly trust.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Fig Factor Weekly. My name's Harry Macy, and this wonderful man opposite me, hostess with the mostess, wonderful Matt Maxted. Matt, how we doing, mate?
Wonderful. Glad to be back.
We've got our Friday afternoon apple juice on the go.
Yeah.
Boom. Lovely,
We are
mate.
a bit dehydrated.
Mm-hmm. Thrilled to be back. This is the only job I've ever had where every single time I'm surprised they ever asked me to come back. Could you imagine on any other job on a Monday, they're like, come in tomorrow. You'd be like, really? I'm always surprised. They're like, we're doing another podcast. I'm like, no, you sure? I'm like, you see the last one?
It's still going.
Crushing
Wow.
it, mate. And you're strolling into the limelight. I'll pretend like I'm not jealous and not feeling a little bit threatened, but you're just
I haven't
crushing
watched it back. I'll be honest. I haven't watched it back. So everyone's giving me compliments. I'm like, I really hope they're legitimate.
Yeah, and I'm sniffing around the office like, I was on it too, you know. You just see me, right? But no, thank you for joining us today, everyone. So the Fig Factor Weekly, we always look at some sort of emerging product, some sort of emerging ingredient, talking point, something that's sort of taking gaining a lot of interest in the market at the moment in time. And this week's subject, we're talking about Bovaer. So for those of you that don't know, and I didn't know until about 48 hours ago, Bovaer is it's. In fact, Matt, you've got a really great insight on it. I think you were pretty much educating me on it yesterday. So please give the good people at home an idea. What is it we're here to have a conversation about today?
So Bovaer is a feed additive that reduces cows' methane. That's it.
Layman's terms, cow methane. Cows fart and burp a lot. We're going to try and say that probably a little more professionally than that throughout the episode today. But ultimately, that's what it is. And it's contributing a huge amount to greenhouse gases and global warming. Right, Matt?
Yeah. Cows produce a lot of farts. Ask any farmer. And they also stink a lot. So this reduces it, and methane is awful for the environment. So this is how this has come about.
What we've sort of noticed is it's really doing the rounds on TikTok in particular. Now, my spelling's not brilliant. When we first started talking about this and I first started looking, I was getting a lot of results up on YouTube and Google because they thought I'd misspelt beaver. So I was a little bit of a way off. But like you said, it's an artificial feed that's being given to cattle to lower methane. So, essentially it's trying to help with greenhouse gases, global warming. And understandably, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of opposing opinions on it. So, the general consensus is, I think there's a lot of people out there who are causing a big stir and a lot of noise saying, what the hell is this stuff that they're putting into our food? Is it going into our milk, yogurt, any dairy products, any meats as well? And I think probably the reason this has gained so much traction is it's major retailers and major supermarkets that pretty much everyone uses who are kind of backing this. Isn't that right, Matt?
Yeah. So Arla are a big one. Lurpak and some of the Tesco's, Morrison's, they've always put statements out about this. I think there's a lot of reasons why this is not trusted. I think the first thing is the way it's been rolled out. It was kind of done on the sly.
It's a bit quiet.
I think these corporations, they're not stupid. They're full of incredibly smart people. They knew the public probably won't trust this. They don't understand it. And so they snuck it out, and then it built traction. There was a Bill Gates link, GB News jumped on it. And then once it gets running on TikTok, that's it. It's exponential. It goes from there.
Yeah.
So that's where this is all built from. And I think we're here just to discuss, people be concerned about it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the kind of headline points about it is it can reduce emissions from cows by 27%, which is a pretty staggering number when you consider it. Like we touched on, cows and meat and dairy production are responsible for about 12 to 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So, if the information is correct and everything is accurate, that's making a pretty big dent in those numbers, isn't it?
Yeah, methane is the second largest contributor to climate change. It's a big problem. There's 4 million cows in this country alone, and they are farting and burping non-stop.
Yeah.
So there's a little
just like someone else we know, Miles Evan Jaws.
Just a little conversion here. So a singular cow will release 70 to 120 kilos of methane in its life. So if you converted this to CO2 and car emissions, that's the equivalent of your average work commute of carbon dioxide. So it's 5,000 to 10,000 miles in a car per cow.
Wow.
That's actually quite considerable. So if you can reduce that by 27%, while not affecting the end user at all. That's a win in my books.
No, and absolutely. And if it, and you know, this is the difficult bit, isn't it? If it is that good, fantastic. Why wouldn't we adopt it? But I think there's a lot of things that are really causing concern and that are really kind of capturing attention. And, you know, we've seen in the UK, sadly, over the past year, a lot of misinformation going around. And unfortunately, you know, I think it's post-COVID. I think pre-COVID, I think everyone just thought, right, anything the government does and government says is right and they have our best interests at heart. And unfortunately, I think, you know, whichever side of the field you stand on with the whole COVID situation, you know, should we have been in lockdown? Should we have had the vaccines? I think one thing that everyone can unanimously agree on is everyone's trust was rattled when all those sort of like 10 Downing Street parties came out and Matt Hancock, you sly boy. I think at that point there, people sort of I think everyone sort of realised like, oh, okay, actually these are just normal people here who ultimately, you know, maybe just looking out for their best interests. And I think that's where this has stemmed from. I think people are much more sceptical now of anything sort of government, doctors.
Yeah, I'd say it's an all-time high.
Yeah.
Distrust in major corporations, distrust in the ruling elite.
That's a much better way of putting it. Any major corporation, any kind of like industrial rollout of anything, I think people now are sort of much more dubious about it and not as quick to adopt it. Like my grandparents during COVID, they were perfect. They did not leave the house once. And every time we speak to them, they just recited news articles and they just said, you know, we will die when we go out. Whereas younger people who had access to more information, I think by the end of COVID, I think people were pretty loose with their following the rules, especially after those 10 Downing Street parties. People are like, right, if the Prime Minister's doing that, I think we're going to follow suit. So that's the tough bit, is I think there is this sort of shaken trust in these manufacturers, in the government and everything like that. And I think the biggest point that I am seeing around the Bovaer controversy is the fact that essentially, you know, again, misinformation. When handling the finished product, it's not essential to be wearing PPE. But one of the big notes that I keep hearing is one of the key components. So it's 3-nitropropanol. Probably mispronounced it. Feel free. We're gonna phonetically spell it out here. But it needs to be handled wearing gloves, PPE. It can't get into the eyes. You can't inhale it. It really affects fertility, irritates skin, and I think that's something really big that I keep seeing cropped up. And you know, just my personal opinion, I completely get that. I would want it to be as far separated from any sort of ingredient like that as I could. However, you know, we spoke about this briefly ahead of time. You know, working in the supplement industry, huge ingredient, citric acid. It's in almost everything. And I think when I first heard the term, I thought, oh, acid, why are we putting in there? But it's all about flavouring. It's all about taste. Now, technically, that's the same. You're meant to wear PPE when you're handling that material. And I think people would be astounded to know how many products that actually ends up being in.
Yeah, there's a good quote here where it dose makes the poison, not the substance. Simple as that. Enough water and you can die. People have. So that's what needs to be looked at right now. We look at, if people see this 3-NOP and they're like, oh my God, that sounds awful. You can't touch it. How the hell can I eat that? Reality is there's not much of it going into this feed. And it gets metabolized inside the cow. So by the time you're having your milk, not eggs, that does not come from a cow. Yeah. So when you're having your milk and meat.
Do we do like the primary school, like farmyard, and like the cow goes moo and the chicken does the eggs?
Can you tell I do not work on a farm?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, by the time you're actually, the end user's having it, it's not in there at all. So it's not, shouldn't be a concern.
I think, and I completely agree with that. I think, you know, looking at the studies, and I understand absolutely that's how it should work. That's how it's aimed to work. I think, again, the other thing that causes some concerns here is that point there. You're saying no trace elements, it won't be in there if it's all at the perfect dose, if it's all been used correctly. Now, I think in anything in this world, I think especially in anything where human error comes into it, I think there's always going to be a degree of human error. I think, okay, you know, maybe whoever's running the farm, managing the farm, they'll weigh it to the point. But, you know, you've worked in loads of jobs and so have I, and, you know, you get some, like, 18-year-old kid who's literally there just to earn minimum wage. You know what's the old expression, pay peanuts, get monkeys. Yeah. You know, who's regulating this?
And we've all seen Clarkson's farm as well. And we know how tough it is for a farmer to make do. They're not going to go and spend millions, or I don't think you can spend millions on scales, but a lot of money on a set of scales that weigh it exactly perfect. So there could be some misweights in there when they're giving it out. But I'd say counterpoint to that, this is actually still have to be purchased by a farmer.
Yeah.
So, and as we just said, they're probably tight on cash. So if a farmer is using this, they're probably more incentivized to
underdo it
yeah,
rather than
they'll
overdo it.
underdo it. A
like
farmer's
that.
going to go, you told me to put a kilo in that.
Yeah.
I'll put half in. I still get my,
Right.
that's-
800 grand, we'll
Yeah.
be fine. But no, I do understand where the skepticism comes from, and yeah, like I said, anything that ultimately can come down to human error is an issue, and also one of the studies that we sort of previously looked at was saying around, it won't make it into the milk, it won't make it into the meat correctly dosed. Now, another thing that I think is there are some variables here that can't be controlled. So, if we fill up a trough that's going to fill our cows, well, there are always going to be, cows aren't going to sit there and say, right, this is my amount, that's your amount. Like, I think there are always going to be cows that are overfed and underfed as well. It's just a pecking order.
I don't think there's communist cows.
Yeah, exactly. They're not sharing it out evenly. So that's just like another interesting point where it's just like, but how can you guarantee? How are you guaranteeing these safe serving sizes? How are you guaranteeing all this information? And I know you've thank God it wasn't me, but you've done a bit of a deeper dive on the studies around it.
And then the main thing is it always comes back to the studies, all the recommendations from Arla, from DSM, from Manch, who produce it, is under the max recommended level, completely harmless, metabolized. So as you're saying there, what happens if it goes over? Now, I know these levels that they're talking about are much, much higher than would ever be given to the cows. So it shouldn't really be of concern.
This is being put out by the producers. This isn't an independent body who's conducting these scientific studies. These are like, I love it whenever products like this come out and they say, hey, completely safe. My mind always goes to the same place. Smoking, that was good for you for the first 50 years. They're like, hey, you got a cough on you, boy? Had your 20 cigarettes today? And like we spoke about, I think, on a previous conversation that we'd had, old-timey medicines where they're like, okay, good, yeah, well, no, I got a headache, good, you want to take these? They've got lead and cocaine in them and this and that. And
I think that's the issue with the scientific method, right? We trust scientists. The way it works is there's no hard truths. They run tests, they run fair tests. Whatever the conclusion is, they give that recommendations. And with diesel cars, first time it's healthy, it's great, wonderful, we'll run them. Oh, wait, no, we made a mistake. We've done a new test, there's a new format, we was wrong. And this is where the distrust comes from. Scientists will release this and they'll say, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe. And then 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, a new testing method comes out and they go,
oh, actually, oh, God, yeah, no, actually, it's horrendous. And I don't want to jump over too many topics here because this is really interesting what we've got here, but it's something that I think is okay. The studies that we have now show that it's fine. We don't have the information for someone who's been consuming these sorts of products for 15, 20 years.
Well, counterpoint, it has been studied for 15 years before, so they have got some.
Yeah.
It hasn't been done on a mass scale.
Okay.
The test, again, another counterpoint. It's been done on 20,000 cows. For
So
15
a very
years.
limited sample selection.
Samples, limited amount of cows for a long period of time, but as there's 4 million cows, we don't know what happens en masse.
Yeah.
So these are the things. It's not a perfect test that's been run on this.
I just worry when, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I enjoy them. Sometimes I entertain them for a little bit, but I definitely wouldn't consider myself a conspiracy theorist. But I think there's proven time and time again, drugs that are, freely sold in America, where actually after 5 years they're like, well, we got to pull that, and they're like, oh no, the scientific studies. And I think, and again, I'm not saying this is the case with Bovaer, but there is always a risk when people have a financial incentive to move ahead with things. If there are studies here with Bovaer, and we've seen it across so many industries and so many products, where actually they will lean towards studies that suit them, studies that sort of back up their points, and especially when, like I said, when what's the value? What's kind of like the value behind Bovaer? It's something crazy. It's 9 million or billion, something mental like that.
Well, the company that's released it, DSM for Mensch, is worth about 9 billion euros.
Yeah, exactly that. And no one ever did anything bad for money, right, guys? Like I just always think there is and again, I'm not saying this is the case here, but I just always think there is a risky element when people have got so much invested in a product or in a company, and they've gone too far down the line, they can't turn back.
And I think this is the issue with how they released it. I keep going back to this point, but if you look at the language they've used, if you look on the government website, the language they've used about this, they've spoken that it's the perfect, safe, trust me, trust me, trust me. That's how they've done it. Now, there is scientists much smarter than me that have run a test that do believe that, but they don't let the consumer make that decision. They just say, we're all knowing. It's like a parent talking to their child. You asked your parents a question, maybe asked them too many, and they're like, no, because I am right. And as a kid, you kind of go, oh, all right, Dad. But as you get older, don't want to do that. You want to go, but why? And I think there's a level of education that's not happened here. It took me hours and hours of research to find the studies on this, the actual studies. They're on PubMed, and they are so bloody complicated. I couldn't make sense of them. I had to put them into ChatGPT to dumb them down to my intelligence level.
You were like, imagine you were explaining this to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Boom.
I went to 2-year-old actually, just to be safe.
That's what I do, yeah.
It was in shapes. Yeah. But that's the point. It's people aren't going out their way to explain it. The scientists are doing all this wonderful research and go, here's the results. Listen to me.
Yeah.
Put it into a Peppa Pig cartoon for us all before you actually put it in
Just
the end product.
Mass roll it out.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting point there. And look, I love to tease, and you're a lot more than a set of glasses. You're really intelligent. You're a great guy. I opened that study and it just was like, done. Close it down. Like for a normal person, it's undigestible information. I think for that level of study, you've got to have a PhD to really understand what you're looking at. And like you said, you need to put it in digestible form. You need to put it in a way that people understand. And I think, again, this is why the conspiracy theorists have got it and they've run with it. And they're like, oh, Bill Gates in London, he's not even associated with the company that's doing it. There's a similar company in the background. But I think this is why the conspiracy theorists hold on to it, because maybe it is a bit of a lack of transparency in rolling it out. Like, I didn't even know this was in these major brands, major retailers until we'd started talking about it.
Yeah, so doing a shadow release of it, it's not really right. One little press release and all of a sudden you've got this in there. It's like, if they did a proper launch and explained it, I don't think these conspiracy theories would have any founding. As you said, Bill Gates, he's nothing to do with this company. He's working with one called Ruminate that are trying to do the same in terms of reducing the methane. But they are not using this ingredient. They are not using the active ingredients at all, so he's nothing to do with it. But every conspiracy theory about this starts with Bill Gates.
Yeah.
And now, because nobody dealt with this properly at the start, we're having this conversation now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, I like, sometimes I'll entertain a little conspiracy theory. Like I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. There are a couple that sort of like, okay, it's got some sense to it, but most of the time it's people who are drastically unqualified to talk about these things, and it's a bit of a, what do you call it, an echo chamber. Like-minded people who want to jump on the bandwagon, they all get each other riled up, and the more each of them say it, the more they believe it, the more false content they put out there, the more they hear it, and they're like, no, I'm committed. And I sort of was trawling through TikTok, just researching, just seeing what's out there, and a couple of things really, really stood out to me. I thought, number one, a lot of the people who were really kind of bad-mouthing it were from like the vegan and vegetarian community. Nothing wrong with it. It's not my bag, but I thought actually it's quite interesting that these are people who are kind of already against farming and who are already against like the meat and dairy industry. I thought it was really interesting that they were doing it. And then there's always like a really classic one that I love when everyone's like, yeah, I'm pretty bad for it as well. In the office this morning, someone came in with a 4-pack of Monster. I was like, you're going to put that poison in your body? First thing I'm going to do when I get home tonight is I'm going to have a whiskey sour. And then I'm going to follow that up with another 3 or 4 whiskey sours. Like, that's like another big thing people love to do. They love to be like, oh, you can't put that in your body. Oh, that's pure poison. But what they'll do is on a Friday night, they'll buy a bag of Coke off someone they've never met in their life. And they'll be like, yep, straight into the lung. No problem. So I do think a lot of these sources and a lot of this information isn't particularly credible. GB News.
You can't cherry pick health. It's like, I'm not saying that if you drink beer heavily and you binge drink, you can't be cautious of these chemicals you're consuming. But it is, okay, the person making drugs in their kitchen can't be trusted. The person that spent years and years and years getting a PhD, along in an office full of other people that spent years and years and years getting a PhD, are probably more trustworthy. So give them the benefit of the doubt sometimes.
That's my favourite thing about conspiracy theories. They're like, don't trust this person who studied for 20 years and is like an industry leading expert. No. Me in my bedroom, I've got the answers. We've got the information. That's my favourite thing. You're always like, how credible are they? Every time I hear a conspiracy theory, I'm like, what's their job? What's their career? What do they do with their life? They're like, oh, they're just a TikToker. I'm like, all right, scratch.
I think that's what this rounds up to being is, as consumers, you should always do your own research and make your own choices and go for diverse sources of information. Do listen to GB News, but on the other end, go and read scientific novels. Not saying GB News isn't scientific, but they've got a viewpoint. If you listen to their video they've done on this, you can tell the angle they're pushing. Listen to it. Make notes. Go to the other end. Go find experts. Don't just find the first thing that someone says online that you like the look of and go, that's the truth.
Yeah,
that's it.
And But this is the difficulty. So there's a couple of really interesting points off this. So, the first one, and one that I've really thought about a lot today ahead of this is, we're saying there's a lot of issues in this product and this and that. Okay, yeah, it's because it's kind of been highlighted, but it's like, I don't know what goes in my bloody baked beans. When I go buy bacon, I don't know how they're treating those pigs, but I don't think about it. I've only it's only drawn my attention to it because there's this big social media storm going on with it. I think we should, I think people should be empowered to know what's in there. But I'm not going to go every time I pick something off the shelf in the supermarket. I'm not going to be like, hold on, let me just get a scientific study up here. All right, give me 47 minutes while I read through this, chat GPT it, and I'll be like, and custard creams are going in the basket. Perfect. And, it's just so difficult. So how, is there a way that the normal person can look into this and do some research? And
there is. It's called the Fig Factor podcast.
Hey, boom. Welcome back. Hey. I love the shameless plugs on the show are by far my favourite bit that we do.
But you're right. The experts have a responsibility here to actually help consumers. If the way I'm looking at this, it's probably a net positive, this, right? It's reducing emissions of methane. It's bad for the environment. Also, cows actually do struggle with flatulence, and that actually hurts their insides. So it's helping the cows as well. Yeah. The farmers are getting help because if they reduce their emissions, they get grants for it, and they're already strapped for cash. So everyone's winning here. But the end consumer wasn't told about this. So the experts that are releasing this, just help people. Tell them that this really long name thing that you can't pronounce is actually orange juice or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's a crap example, but you get what I'm trying to say here. It's just educate the consumers. Do a little bit. Brian Cox is, I think, the best example. On Joe Rogan, he goes on there and he's talking about wildly complicated physicist stuff, but puts it in such simple terms that you can now actually sit there with your friends and discuss, theoretical
astrophysicism,
physics.
absolutely.
You're not experts in it, but you get a really good understanding.
Yeah.
I don't see anyone doing that in the food industry.
No, I think that's the problem. I think the whole thing just feels a little bit behind closed doors, a little bit under the rug, doesn't it? It doesn't feel like it's been outright discussed. And then, I don't want anything extra going in my food. In a perfect world, I'd live farm to table, but I understand. Firstly, that's a really expensive way to live, and secondly, with the current population, I understand it's just not possible. And I think that's another big point. Like, okay, people sort of have all these comments saying, oh, cows have been natural for thousands of years and we didn't need this thousands of years ago. Yeah, but guess what? We didn't have, what is it now in the UK? 65 million people? It's something like that.
It's like 70 now.
Yeah, we didn't have that many millions of people living on this beautiful tiny little island. Yeah, of course, factory farmers had to ramp up. And yeah, of course, as a result of that, greenhouse gases and global warming and everything's there. They're trying to balance it out as best they can. And I think that's another thing people aren't thinking about. They say, the ecosystem's always been a... Well, you know what? People used to have 15 children because they were like 10 of them will die, and then another 3 will lose working on the field. So
modern medicine's a marvel, and it's like you can't say, I don't want this in my food, but the moment you get ill and you've got a serious problem, you run to the doctors, and whatever they give you, you, again, cannot pronounce or have any idea what it is. You go, oh, I'll have that. So you'll trust your GP, but you're not going to trust another scientist. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah, you can't sort of have one or the other, can you? You can't be like, oh no, I don't trust those doctors. As soon as you've got a headache, you're like, paracetamol, please, quick, and just hand it over.
Exactly.
And again, you go to the hospital with like a bad injury. Whatever they said, you're like, just do it. Yeah,
you're not going to, I broke my leg, I need painkillers. Like, do you want this? No, I'll have a carrot. Like, it's not going to help you.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. But I think it's, I think it's like another, like I said, I think it's post-COVID. I think just everyone loves a bit of a conspiracy theory since then, and they seem to have really caught fire. And like I said, it seems to be a lot of people who aren't directly involved, who aren't particularly educated on the subject, who seem to be the ones really sort of spreading it all around. I don't think I've seen a single clip where I've been like, wow, this person seems so well informed, or this person's really educated on the subject and says something negative about it.
But I think this is a case, though, where sometimes a broken clock is right. That whole saying. Just because they haven't got the education, there's nothing wrong with raising the question. Just ask the question, and that's it. So just because someone's in their bedroom doing it on TikTok isn't the end of the world. It just means you've got to do your research.
Yeah, exactly.
Go look at the sources.
Can't take it on face value, can you?
Never. No.
Yeah, I think another really interesting thing about it that I'd sort of considered as well is, I think the UK as a whole, we're only responsible. I say only. I know it's not ideal, but we're responsible only for about 1% of global emissions. That's it. We are obviously doing as world leaders, we're doing our best to reduce that. And I think it's more so about setting an example and putting the best foot forward. But in comparison to, I don't mean this in a derogatory way at all, but obviously major manufacturing across Asia, in India, in China, as I think is the number one world's worst for pollution. We're barely making a dent. We're barely making a dent in global pollution here by doing this. But I think it is more of trying to say, right, if we lead this way, perhaps everyone else will follow. But I think that's another point. It does feel a little bit reductive. It's a little bit, have my arm cut off and I'm gonna put a plaster on it and be like, hey, you're all right now.
Yeah, but I think not to. Well, don't take the moral high ground of the global emissions, but it's like we still should try our best.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
use the small flush when you go for a wee. Don't use the big one. Don't waste the water. That sort of thing. Get the electric cars. Do
or
our little
you
bit.
go, hey, if it's brown, flush it down. If it's yellow, let it mellow. Right? So that's the rule you see sometimes.
Right, so you're the one that leaves it in now.
No, Joe, I'm horrendous. I'm like big flush every time. Sometimes I like to just double it through. Sometimes I'll flush before I go, just to be like, I like to just cleanse the room.
Okay, so you now the water waster. That's you.
But I think it is. It is an interesting topic, and I think over the coming years we'll, I'm sure it'll stabilise, but it'll be interesting to see if more brands, more manufacturers, more retailers adopt this, or whether it does kind of drop off quietly. But I guess, ultimately, I know Matt doesn't drink hot drinks, but I take a huge amount of sort of dairy as part of my day to day. I'm a very regular meat eater, and just from the conversations around Bovaer, I now understand so much more those arguments where they say, do you know what, if everyone in the UK went vegetarian for, I think they only say it's like a day or two a week, what a huge impact that would make. I had no idea how much, how big the sort of cattle industry was and everything like that. But I think, I know it's not ideal, but I'm not going to stop. Ultimately, I think I don't love they're putting extra things in there. I'm not about to give up my meat and my milk and my cheese and everything like that. I'd have nothing left. Doing
this, the way they've done it, I've voiced that enough today, but making it so us as humans don't have to change the way we live, reducing emissions is great. The studies that I've looked at, going on for 15 years, there's over 150 of them, ran in numerous countries. These are so well documented and peer reviewed as well, meaning that other people that are not involved have had a look at this and gone, right, given it's the A-OK, you guys have done a good job. This is trustworthy. They're not paid for. They're not bought. So these can be trusted. I think this is great. Really, I think it is a net positive for the world. It's just a shame that we've ended up having to have this conversation about it. But again, as you say, consumers should just make the decision. Yeah. Allow it. If you don't want to take this, you should be allowed to not take it, even if it's irrational.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I also think it's the brand's responsibility to highlight to us what products it's in and it's out. So people can make the choice themselves. But otherwise, I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I think the takeaway here is, we really recommend that people do their own research, people think for themselves. I think there's some fantastic information available on social media, but I think these days it's weighted a bit too much against these people who have spent their whole lives dedicated it to an industry. And I think that's about us for today. Matt, anything else to add?
No, it's been incredibly enjoyable.
Matt, a pleasure, my treasure, as always. We're going to have a couple more of these, get out of here, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you very much for joining, guys. This has been the Fig Factor Weekly. I'm Harry.
I'm Matt.
And we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.
The Fig Factor, there's no one like us. The only podcast you can truly trust.